The studio lights glowed hot, the chairs were set, the cameras rolled in silence, and when Pam Bondi stepped onto the stage of The View, the energy shifted. She walked in calmly, shoulders squared, chin high, but there was a certain weight in her every step. Everyone knew this wouldn't be an ordinary interview. It was a collision course. Across the table sat Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sunny Hostin, poised like seasoned fencers waiting for the first move. They had their questions sharpened. The crowd murmured with quiet anticipation. It wasn't just another episode. It felt like a showdown. Pam took her seat, nodding to the hosts with polite restraint. Her posture wasn't defiant but composed, deliberate. The camera zoomed in just as Whoopi leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Her gaze was fixed, her tone cutting but calm. "Pam," Whoopi began, "you've recently pushed for a 100% tariff on foreign films. A lot of people say that's extreme, that it'll do more harm than good. What are you really trying to accomplish?" The audience went still. Pam took a single breath. The air around her tightened. "This isn't about politics," she said evenly. "It's about protecting our workers, our culture, our future." A few in the crowd nodded. Most stayed silent. The words landed like a quiet thud on a cold floor. Joy Behar didn't miss a beat. "Protecting workers?" she echoed, leaning in. "Come on, Pam. Be honest. Isn't this just political theater? Another headline grab?" The tone sharpened. You could feel it. But Pam didn't flinch. She looked Joy straight in the eye. "I've spent decades in public service," she replied. "And I've seen what happens when industries forget who built them. This isn't theater. It's a wake-up call." The host exchanged glances. There was a shift in the room, not agreement, but attention, a hesitation. And then Whoopi pressed again. "Pam, be real. Tariffs mean higher prices for consumers, maybe even a trade war. You're talking about helping people, but is this the way to do it?" The air thickened. The audience leaned forward. Pam looked at her, steady. "The real price," she said, "isn't at the ticket counter. It's in lost jobs, lost communities, lost dignity." Silence. For the first time, the hosts didn't immediately respond. Pam had drawn her line, and the room had no choice but to feel it. The silence didn't last. Joy Behar, ever the provocateur, leaned NES sharp, voice a little louder now. The smile on her face wasn't friendly. It was the kind that said, "I'm not done with you yet." "So let me ask you this, Pam," she said, her tone tight. "You talk about protecting American workers, but some people think this is just you pandering. Is this really about jobs, sir? Is it about scoring points with your base?" The question hit hard. The studio lights seemed to buzz louder. A ripple of murmurs stirred the audience. Even the camera paused a half-second longer on Pam's face, as if waiting to catch a crack in her expression. But it didn't come. Pam inhaled slowly, and when she spoke, her voice had changed, not louder, but firmer. "I've worked with communities that got hollowed out when factories closed. I've looked into the eyes of men and women who lost everything, not just jobs, but purpose, pride, security." She glanced briefly at Joy. "This isn't political. It's personal." For a moment, the room stilled again. The audience was still skeptical, but they were listening. You could feel it. Joy leaned back, almost surprised, but Sunny Hostin wasn't going to let the moment settle. She folded her arms and raised an eyebrow. "Personal, Pam. You've made a career saying things that stirred controversy. And now you want us to believe you're here for unity? That's a big pivot, don't you think?" The audience let out a soft gasp. Pam didn't look away. "I know what I've said. I've made mistakes. Big ones," she admitted. "But growth doesn't come from pretending they didn't happen. It comes from facing them. That's what I'm doing right now." It wasn't defensive. It wasn't rehearsed. It was raw. And the room felt it. For a long second, no one spoke. The hosts didn't interrupt. Even the audience sat quieter than before. Then, slowly, a single clap from the back row. Then another. It wasn't a standing ovation. Not yet. But it was the sound of a shift of recognition that this conversation had just become something more than political theater. Pam didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just sat there, steady, ready. Because the hardest questions were still coming. and she wasn't going anywhere. Whoopi wasn't clapping. She didn't lean back. She didn't soften. Instead, she narrowed her eyes and went in for the next strike deeper, sharper, economic. "But Pam," she said, voice calm but piercing, "what about everyday people? You keep saying this is about jobs, but let's be real, tariffs will make movie tickets more expensive. Families already struggle to afford a night out. Isn't this just shifting the burden onto them?" A hum rolled through the crowd. It was the kind of question that sticks, the kind that makes people hesitate. Pam didn't flinch, but she didn't answer right away either. Instead, she looked at the audience. Not at Whoopi, not at the hosts. She scanned the rows of facezreal people, middle class, working people. People who might be wondering if she really cared about them, or if she was just spinning a message. Then she spoke. "I hear you," she said gently. "And I get it. No one wants higher prices." Her voice dropped a note lower, steadier. "But here's the real cost. It's not at the ticket booth. It's in the empty storefronts, the towns with no jobs, the factories that moved overseas, the kids growing up watching their parents lose hope." A hush fell over the studio. She turned back to Whoopi. "Every time we outsource another industry, we don't just lose products. We lose communities. We lose identity." Whoopi held her gaze, but said nothing. Pam leaned in. "This isn't about punishing consumers. It's about finally standing up for the people who built this country and are being left behind." You could hear a pin drop. Even the crew behind the cameras had stopped moving. The hosts weren't ready for this version of Pam. Not angry, not defensive, just grounded, resolute. Sunny shifted in her seat. Joy tapped a pen nervously. Whoopi glanced at the cue cards, but ignored them. Something had changed, not in agreement, but in tone. This wasn't the same conversation anymore. It wasn't a debate. It had become a reckoning. Pam looked out across the studio again, and with calm conviction, she said, "If we don't draw the line somewhere, we'll wake up one day and realize we've sold out everything that made us strong just to save a few dollars today." The words landed hard, and for once, even Whoopi didn't have a comeback ready. But the silence didn't last. Sunny Hostin shifted in her chair, arms folded, eyes sharp. The calm in the room had unsettled her, and now she leaned forward like someone about to throw the first real punch. "You talk a good game, Pam," Sunny said, voice cool and deliberate. "But you've had a past and ugly one. Controversial comments, polarizing interviews. Are we just supposed to forget all of that because you've suddenly wrapped yourself in the American flag?" A few gasps flickered through the audience. The question didn't just challenge her policy, it went for her character. Pam didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. Instead, she took a breath so deep and measured it seemed to stretch the air around her. Then she looked at Sunny, not combative, not defensive, just direct. "I've made mistakes," Pam said, voice even, "big ones, and I've paid the price for every single one of them." She glanced down for a beat, then back up this time, locking eyes not just with Sunny, but with the entire audience. "But I didn't come here to pretend I'm perfect. I came here because I'm not, and because growth only happens when you stop running from your past." There it was. No excuses, no blame, just truth. The room froze. The host said nothing. Even the audience sat still, unsure of how to respond to a moment that didn't fit the usual rhythm of confrontation. It wasn't a mic drop. It was heavier than that. Honest, personal, real. Sunny, for a second, looked caught off guard. The fire in her eyes dimmed, not gone, but flickering. Joy looked down at her notes. Whoopi stared silently. Pam wasn't preaching. She wasn't performing. She was confessing and claiming every scar. Then she added, quieter this time, "I'm not asking anyone to forget. I'm asking for the chance to show that people can change." The words floated in the stillness. Then, from somewhere near the front row, came a single clap. One, then two, then a few more. It wasn't thunderous, but it was honest. It was the sound of a room deciding to listen instead of label. Pam sat quietly, not milking the moment. She just waited. Because this wasn't the end of the conversation. It was only the beginning of something deeper. The applause had barely faded when Whoopi leaned forward again, refusing to surrender the moment. She narrowed her eyes. Her voice dipped low-note, angry, but surgical. "You say you've changed," she said. "But protecting jobs doesn't fix character, Pam. Tariffs build economic walls. What about the walls in your own life? The ones your words helped build? What are you doing to tear those down?" A hush swept across the studio. It wasn't just a challenge. It was personal, sharp, unforgiving. Pam paused. The cameras caught her stillness, not frozen but grounded. She looked at Whoopi, then slowly turned her gaze to the audience. Every eye was locked on her. And then, in a voice quieter than any she'd used before but somehow more powerful than all of them, she spoke. "You don't tear down walls by shouting at people," she said. "You tear them down by listening even to the ones you disagree with." Silence. It wasn't a comeback. It wasn't a soundbite. It was something else entirely. Real. The words hovered in the air like smoke. Joy Behar blinked. Sunny shifted. Even Whoopi seemed still. Something had cracked. Not defeat, not surrender, but understanding. The audience, too, didn't cheer not yet. They just sat in that moment, absorbing it. No one expected Pam to meet that question with humility, with depth, but she had. And now the weight of her words was undeniable. For years, shows like this had run on volume who could speak louder, interrupt faster, dominate the table. But in that one sentence, Pam had flipped the script. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't dodged. She listened. She answered. And she let the silence speak. The hosts exchanged glances, and the shift between them was subtle but real. This wasn't the fight they expected. This wasn't someone hiding behind politics or pride. This was someone showing up with truth, flaws, and an open hand. The moment lingered. Then Whoopi cleared her throat, breaking the spell. "We're going to take a break," she said, voice lower now. "We'll be right back." As the lights dimmed and cameras cut to commercial, the studio wasn't buzzing with outrage. It was sitting in reflection. Pam hadn't won a battle. She had shifted the entire battlefield. And the war of noise, just for a moment, had given way to something far more powerful. Silence. When the cameras came back on, the air in the studio felt different. The sharp edges from earlier had softened, but the questions hadn't stopped. If anything, they were about to get sharper, deeper, more philosophical. This time, it was Sunny Hostin who leaned forward. Her voice wasn't combative, but curious, like someone trying to solve a riddle that didn't quite fit. "So, Pam," she said, folding her hands on the table, "you've talked a lot about fairness, about protecting workers. But capitalism's true capitalismus built on global competition. If another country can make it cheaper, maybe that's just how the market works. Are you saying we should stop competing?" Pam sat up straighter. Her answer didn't come immediately. Instead, she let the question sit in the air for a moment, let the audience think about it. Then, calm and sure, she spoke. "Capitalism without a conscience isn't strength," she said. "It's surrender." The audience shifted, heads tilted. That line cut through the usual debate. "When we allow corporations to chase the cheapest labor, no matter the cost to people back home, we're not competing," Pam continued. "We're abandoning. There's a difference." The weight of her words landed. Not everyone agreed, but they listened. Joy Behar, always quick with a counter, jumped in. "But Pam," she said, tapping her pen, "that's how global markets work. You want to protect jobs, I get it. But won't that just isolate us? Make things worse for everyone in the long run?" Pam turned to her calmly. "We're not isolating," she said. "We're asking for balance. Fairness." She looked to the crowd. "Global doesn't have to mean exploitative. We can be part of the world without selling out our own people." A murmur of agreement moved through the audience, quiet, but present. Sunny leaned back, considering the response. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't attacking either. For the first time, it looked like she was processing. Pam pressed on. "Fair competition lifts everyone. But right now, we've got American workers playing a rigged game. And when the game's rigged, someone needs to flip the table." That last line hit like a jolt. Even a few of the crew members behind the cameras nodded subtly. The studio wasn't combative anymore. It was curious, awake, engaged. And as Pam folded her hands on the table, she wasn't just holding her ground. She was redrawing the lineament, daring anyone to cross it. The conversation had shifted, but the skepticism hadn't disappeared. Joy Behar leaned in again, her tone more measured now, but no less pointed. "Pam," she said, "let's be real. Some people say this isn't about protecting workers or fairness. They say this is just you trying to clean up your image. Is this all just rebranding?" The audience held its breath. It was the question many had likely been wondering. Was this change in tone, in message, in humility just performance? Pam didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She looked Joy straight in the eye and answered slowly, each word deliberate. "If I were rebranding," she said, "I'd be on a magazine cover. I'd be launching a perfume line or posing with influencers. That's what rebranding looks like." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. "But I'm sitting here," she continued, "taking tough questions from people who disagree with me because I believe what I'm saying matters, because I've lived through it. And because I'm not interested in polishing my image, I'm interested in changing the conversation." The mood in the room thickened. She wasn't just defending herself, she was declaring something deeper. Sunny raised an eyebrow. "But that's the thing, Pam," she said. "Words are easy. How do we know this isn't just a new script for a different audience?" Pam turned slightly, facing the camera, not the hosts. "You'll know by what I do next," she said simply. "Not what I say, but how I live, how I lead, how I show up. And you'll know I meant every word. Not because I convinced you today, but because I kept showing up tomorrow." It was quiet again. Not because the moment was shocking, but because it was undeniable. Something in the way she said it stripped away the armor of performance. It didn't sound like spin. It sounded like someone who had been broken and rebuilt, someone who knew that redemption couldn't be demanded, only earned. Even Joy seemed to soften, if only for a breath. And as Pam sat back, letting the moment breathe, the crowd slowly began to applaud, not for victory, but for honesty. Not for agreement, but for courage. Pam hadn't erased her past. She had owned it, walked through it, and planted her flag on the other side. And now, for the first time, the room wasn't asking if she was real. They were starting to believe she just might be. For the first time that morning, the studio felt still. Not frozen, not silent, just still, like something fragile was unfolding. Pam's words lingered in the air. But now, instead of rushing to fill the space with rebuttals, the hosts sat quietly, digesting. Joy looked down at her notes, flipping them but not reading. Sunny stared at her hands. Even Whoopi seemed caught between thought and instinct. It wasn't surrender. It was respect. Not because they suddenly agreed with Pam Bondi, because they recognized what she had done. She hadn't argued her way into their approval. She had opened a door and stood in it, unafraid. Sunny was the first to speak. "You know, Pam," she said softly, "I've heard a lot of people talk about change, but most of the time it feels scripted. This doesn't..." Pam nodded, not with pride, but with calm acceptance. "Because it's not," she said. She wasn't reaching for applause. She wasn't claiming victory. She was standing in something more rare truth, without decoration. Whoopi leaned forward. "I'll admit," she said, her voice slower now, "I came in ready for a fight. You've said things before that made a lot of people, myself included, pretty angry. But today, it's different." Pam didn't interrupt. She just listened. And that, in itself, was part of the shift. The tension that once filled the air had been replaced by something else. Curiosity, reflection, even a hint of grace. The studio audience, sensing the change, sat quieter than before, no longer reacting to every jab, just watching, feeling, waiting. Joy finally looked up. "I don't know if I'm ready to buy everything you're saying," she admitted. "But I can say this, you didn't dodge. You didn't spin. That matters." Pam smiled faintly. "That's all I'm asking. A chance to be heard. A simple request. But in today's world, it was radical. For so long, talk shows thrived on combatant, cutting off, talking over, dramatic moments designed for viral clips. But this was different. This was a conversation. And somehow, in the middle of national television, with cameras rolling and reputations on the line, something rare had happened. They stopped trying to win. and started trying to understand. Pam wasn't there to change minds in a single hour. She was there to remind every audience, hosts, and even herself that courage wasn't always loud. Sometimes, it was just refusing to walk away. The lights above the studio dimmed slightly as the show prepared for its final segment, but no one was checking their phones. No one was whispering backstage. Everyone host's audience crew was watching Pam Bondi. And for once, not as a political figure or a headline magnet, but as a person. Whoopi leaned forward again. Her voice was softer now, but still full of weight. "All right, Pam," she said. "We've talked about your past, about the policies. But as we wrap this up, what comes next? What do you actually want people to do?" It was an open door. Pam didn't rush through it. She sat quietly for a beat, then looked around the room not just at the hosts, but at the viewers behind the lens. "We need to start by listening," she said. "No buzzwords, no fireworks. Just that, listening. To the workers who are never interviewed, to the parents who worry more about jobs than movie tickets, to the people no one thanks but who make everything possible." She wasn't trying to impress. She was trying to reach. Joy folded her arms, thoughtful. "So, you're saying this is bigger than politics?" Pam nodded slowly. "It has to be. If we reduce everything to left or right, we'll miss the heart of the issue, which is people. Real lives, real pain, real hope." A few audience members clapped, but most just watched, quietly engaged. Sunny spoke next, her voice more introspective than before. "But how do you break through? How do you actually change people's mind, especially the ones who already think they know you?" Pam didn't blink. "You don't try to change them," she said. "You show them, over time, through action, not just words." She looked around the studio again. "We've got enough noise. What we need now are braver conversations. The kind where we disagree but still care enough to stay in the room." There it was. A challenge to the world outside that studio. Not to shout louder but to stay. To wrestle. To listen. Whoopi gave a small, nod measured, but real. "That's rare," she said quietly. The moment was no longer about defending a position. It had become about redefining what it means to fight for something. Not with anger, but with presence. Pam wasn't just holding her ground anymore. She was inviting everyone to meet her there. As the final seconds of the segment ticked down, the studio sat in an unfamiliar hush. No shouting match, no buzzer-beater applause line, just reflection. Whoopi glanced at the producers off camera, then turned back to Pam, her voice steady. "You've given us a lot to think about," she said. "But here's the last question. How do we move forward when so many people are so divided?" Pam didn't hesitate. "You don't need louder voices," she said. "You need braver ones." The audience leaned in again. Voices willing to sit at the table even when they're outnumbered. Voices that choose respect over rage and truth over tribalism. She wasn't preaching. She was planting something. Real change starts when we stop performing and start listening. When we stop canceling and start confronting with empathy. That's the only way forward. Joy tapped her fingers slowly on the table, eyes softer than they'd been all morning. "That's a hard ask," she said, almost to herself. Pam nodded. "It should be," she replied. "The easy stuff never fixes anything." She let the words sit. No slogan, no applause bait. Just the truth. As the outro music faded in, Whoopi prepared to close. But before she could speak, Pam added one last thought, quiet, almost like it wasn't meant for the cameras at all. "We don't have to agree," she said. "We just have to care enough to stay in the conversation." That was it. A sentence so simple, yet so powerful. It froze the studio for the third time that morning. The credits began to roll. No dramatic walk-off, no gotcha moment. Just Pam, rising from her seat, nodding respectfully to the hosts, and walking off the set without fanfare. But the shift she left behind? Undeniable. The audience wasn't erupting. They were reflecting. The crew wasn't rushing. They were processing. And the hosts who had entered the interview bracing for battle now sat quietly, still holding the weight of the unexpected. Pam hadn't come to win a fight. She came to change how the fight was fought. And in that, she succeeded. As the cameras powered down and the lights began to fade, one thing was clear. What happened on that stage wasn't just a segment. It was a statement. And long after the show ended, long after the chairs were emptied and the applause faded, the conversation Pam started was still echoing.